Imagine standing on the edge of an impossible battle, your enemies outnumber you like grains of sand, and all you have is a whisper from heaven telling you to move forward. This is not just a war story, this is Gideon's night, when fear met faith, and angels confirmed the victory before the first sword was drawn. Welcome to Divine War Stories, where we dive into the epic unseen battles of Scripture. Wars fought not only with weapons, but with faith, courage, and divine intervention. If you're ready to witness how heaven steps into human wars, stay with us until the end. The night was colder than Gideon expected, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your hands tremble, though he knew it wasn't just the temperature, it was the weight of what lay ahead. Before him, the valley stretched like an ocean of shadows, each tent a dark reminder of the countless Midianite warriors sleeping, unaware of the storm heaven had planned. His army, once 32,000 strong, had been reduced to 300 men, a number so absurdly small that it felt like a cruel joke. Yet Gideon had learned that God's math was different from man's, and that divine strategy often looked like human madness. Hours before, Gideon had stood in silence, listening to the voice that told him to send most of his men home. Those who trembled with fear were the first to leave, and even that made sense. Cowards could break a battle before it began. But then a strange test followed, the drinking of water. Those who cupped it in their hands remained, those who knelt were sent away. By the end, Gideon looked around and saw only 300, yet something about their faces, hardened, focused, made him believe this was no accident. Still, belief is fragile when the odds glare at you from across the valley. That's when the angel came, not with a blinding light or the crash of thunder, but with a whisper in Gideon's heart, "Go down to the camp, for I have given it into your hands." The words carried weight, as if each syllable was forged in heaven's fire. Yet there was an added mercy. If Gideon still felt afraid, he was told to take his servant, Purah, and listen to what the enemy was saying. So, in the deep hours of the night, Gideon crept through the wilderness, the dry grass whispering under his sandals. Every shadow felt like it might leap at him, every sound was a potential alarm, yet his steps grew bolder with each heartbeat. They approached the edge of the Midianite camp, where fires burned low and guards fought against sleep. And then, through the thin canvas of a tent, they heard voices, one man speaking, another listening intently. "I had a dream," the soldier's voice quivered, "and in my dream, a loaf of barley bread came tumbling into our camp. It struck a tent with such force that the tent collapsed." His companion leaned forward, his tone laced with dread. "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." The words sank deep into Gideon's chest like an arrow of light, burning away every last trace of doubt. Gideon's breath caught in his throat, not from fear now but from awe. He had just witnessed divine confirmation, straight from the lips of his enemies. Without a single sword raised, the Lord had already placed terror in their hearts. This was more than reassurance. This was a heavenly decree spoken in the dark, sealed by the angel's earlier whisper. Gideon's eyes met Purah's, and both men knew, this battle was already won. They returned to their camp, moving with a swiftness fueled by unshakable certainty. The 300 stirred from their rest as Gideon's voice rose above the night air, strong and sure, "Get up! The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." The soldiers looked at him, and in his tone they heard something different. This was no commander's pep talk. This was a man speaking with the weight of heaven behind him. The plan was simple, almost laughably so. Each man would carry a trumpet, a clay jar, and a torch hidden inside the jar. No swords were drawn for the first strike, only sound, light, and the element of terror. Gideon divided them into 3 companies, placing each group at different points around the enemy camp. They would wait for his signal and then act in perfect unison. As they took their positions, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Gideon's heart pounded, not with doubt but with anticipation. He gripped his trumpet, feeling the rough texture of the ram's horn beneath his fingers. He thought again of the angel's words, of the dream in the enemy tent, and he realized that this was not just a fight, it was a demonstration, a spectacle designed to show Israel, the Midianites, and every watching power in heaven and hell that the battle belongs to the Lord. Then at Gideon's signal, the night exploded. The sound of 300 trumpets shattered the silence, followed by the crash of breaking jars. Torches flared like sudden lightning, surrounding the Midianite camp in a circle of fire. The enemy woke in panic, swords flashing in confusion, striking at friend and foe alike. And above the chaos, the cry of Gideon's men echoed like thunder over the hills, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." If you are enjoying this video, please like, subscribe and hit the notification bell to help this channel reach more people. Now let's continue. The Midianite camp became a storm of confusion, men shouting, tents collapsing, fires spreading as panic swallowed their ranks. They had no idea how many soldiers surrounded them. The sound of trumpets and the glow of torches made it seem as if an entire army had descended from the hills. In the dark chaos, they turned their swords on each other, striking wildly at shadows and shapes that might have been friend or foe. What Gideon saw was not a normal battle, it was fear itself, weaponized by the hand of God. From his position, Gideon could feel the momentum shift, the invisible tide of the fight pushing against the Midianites. The angel's promise was unfolding exactly as spoken. These 300 men had not lifted their swords in offense, yet the enemy was crumbling. Gideon understood in that moment that the real weapon had been faith all along. Faith that God could do more with less, faith that obedience outweighs numbers, faith that a whisper from heaven can dismantle an army. The Midianites fled, scattering like leaves caught in a violent wind. Gideon signaled for the pursuit, but he knew the victory had already been sealed in those first moments of chaos. As his men chased the remnants of the enemy, the stars above seemed to burn brighter, as if heaven itself was leaning closer to witness what obedience and courage had accomplished. Gideon's heart was steady now, free from the fear that had once gripped him. He thought of the earlier days when he had been threshing wheat in secret, hiding from these same Midianites, feeling like the weakest in his family, the least in his clan. And yet, God had looked at him then and called him a mighty warrior. Tonight had proved that God's words are never careless. They are declarations waiting to be lived out. Back in the camp of Israel, the news spread like wildfire. Villages that had been under the Midianite yoke for years now lifted their heads in freedom. The victory wasn't just military, it was a shift in the spirit of a nation. People remembered that their God was not distant or powerless, but present and mighty, capable of turning hopeless situations into miracles. Gideon gathered his 300 men, looking into their tired but shining faces. These were not the most skilled warriors, nor the strongest, nor the most celebrated, but they had been chosen, refined, and tested until only those who trusted the impossible remained. They had learned something that night, that when heaven fights beside you, numbers are irrelevant, and the impossible becomes inevitable. The angel who had first spoken to Gideon did not appear again in the open, yet Gideon felt the presence still, quiet, watchful, approving. It was as if the angel's role had been to set the plan in motion, to remind Gideon that fear does not disqualify a warrior. Rather, faith in the midst of fear makes one unstoppable. The confirmation had been given, the victory won, and the story would echo for generations. As dawn broke over the valley, the battlefield lay silent except for the distant sounds of retreating enemies. Gideon stood on a ridge, the wind carrying the scent of smoke and dust, and he realized something deeper. The greatest battles are not always won by strategy, skill, or strength. They are won when a heart dares to trust the voice of God over the noise of fear, when a leader listens not to the size of the problem but to the certainty of the promise. In the years to come, people would speak of this night with awe. They would remember the trumpets, the torches, the shattered jars, but most of all, they would remember the moment when the smallest army Israel had ever fielded brought the greatest victory against impossible odds. And somewhere in those retellings, they would whisper of the angel who had confirmed the win before the fight had even begun. If this story stirs something in you, remember, your battle might feel overwhelming, your resources too few, your strength too small. But if God has spoken, the outcome is already decided. Stand even trembling and move forward with faith. And if you want to hear more of these divine war stories, where heaven's hand turns the tide of impossible battles, make sure to stay with us, subscribe, and walk with us through the next victories heaven has already written.